It was such a strange, planned, and calculated crime that it united two nations in shock and despair. And with the suspect rising to the top of Japan's most wanted list, he would deform his own face to keep his true identity hidden from the world. Today, we'll be analyzing the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi and his victim, Lindsay Hawker. There are many strange and disturbing details in this case, including a body in a flower pot, plastic surgery to avoid being caught, and a worldwide manhunt for the suspect that would take years for police to capture him across Japan. So, pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and settle in. This is the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi. While our story today takes us to Japan, it begins in England in a city called Coventry. Located in the heart of the Midlands region of England, it is known for its medieval cathedral and, unfortunately, also for its destruction during World War II. Coventry has rebuilt itself in recent decades, becoming an engineering hub in the UK, with easy access to London, Birmingham, and much of the country, all within a 2-hour drive. It's a well-placed city full of opportunities for its residents, and one of those residents was Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay was born on December 30th, 1984, the daughter of Bill and Julia Hawker. She was a happy child and grew up alongside her two sisters, Louise and Lisa. She studied at King Henry VIII School and, by the end of high school, entered the University of Leeds to study biology. At university, she achieved academic success and in 2006 graduated with a first-class honors degree, being very dedicated to her future career while also being popular among friends. Lindsay had a lot ahead of her. She was smart, caring, and successful, but she also wanted to experience something new before continuing her master's studies. So, in mid-2006, she decided to take a break from her studies to travel a bit while working. She believed that a year away from education would bring a new perspective to her life. And in October 2006, she enrolled at the Nova English School and boarded a plane to Japan. She had signed up for Nova, the largest private English school in Japan, which recruits adults from all over the world to teach the language in Osaka and Tokyo. Nova is considered a prestigious opportunity, and Lindsay was one of the lucky few who secured a spot. After arriving in Tokyo, Lindsay was assigned to Koiwa, a district in Edagawa, Tokyo, and quickly found comfort and excitement in her surroundings. Located just 17 minutes from Akihabara and 22 minutes from Asakusa, there are countless attractions, activities, and fun things to do near Koiwa. Whether it's food, parks, shopping, temples, or just a good drink, Tokyo has it all. She found herself in one of the most interesting cities the world has to offer, and she was loving it. She decided to move a bit further east from central Tokyo to a place called Chiba, where the rent was cheaper. She also moved into an apartment with two other teachers who worked at a different school, and the three quickly became friends. Shortly after, Lindsay's time in Tokyo began to fly by. Although she was loving her stay away from home, Lindsay often thought about her homeland. She had a loving family, a great group of friends, and a boyfriend back in England. Thus, she kept in constant touch via Facebook, Skype, texting, and phone calls. 6 months after her arrival in Tokyo, in March 2007, Lindsay had an uncomfortable encounter. After finishing her work for the day, she returned to Chiba Station and went to retrieve her bike. As she unlocked the bike, a man approached her from behind. When she turned around, the man greeted her, saying, "You're my English teacher." Lindsay was confused, as she was sure he wasn't one of her students. She awkwardly refused to comment, but the man continued to follow her. She got on her bike and began pedaling away, but he still followed her. She sped up, and he, who had been walking, began to jog, and then his jog turned into a run. With the many streets and alleyways of Chiba, it was almost impossible for Lindsay to escape him. He kept trying to strike up a conversation, asking where she was from and where she studied, but she was still trying to shake him off. Eventually, she reached her apartment and stopped her bike. The man was known as Tatsuya Ichihashi, and he had followed her all the way back home. When he finally caught up with her, he had a proposition to make, and despite his strange approach, the offer seemed simple and innocent. Tatsuya asked Lindsay if she would be interested in tutoring him in English, as he felt he needed help with the language. They could meet at a cafe, and he would pay her generously by the hour. Lindsay politely declined, explaining that her work schedule was already quite full and that her free time was for leisure. Tatsuya seemed disappointed, but appeared to accept her answer. It was at that moment he made one last strange request. He said he was thirsty after basically chasing Lindsay through the streets of Chiba and asked if she could offer him a glass of water in her apartment. Lindsay hesitated, but reluctantly allowed him to come in. Although he was a strange man and made her uncomfortable, she had 2 roommates, which seemed like a good opportunity to indirectly show that there was always company in her home and that her friends would see his face if anything happened in the future. They entered the apartment together, and it was in there, while having the water, that he made the offer again, now with a price. He would pay Lindsay 3,500 yen, or about $32 an hour, and the meeting would be strictly professional. This was an offer Lindsay couldn't refuse, as, while Nova was helping her survive in Tokyo, extra money would be welcome. She agreed to his request, deciding to meet him at a cafe a few days later. Tatsuya thanked her and praised her for the decision. Before leaving the apartment, he wanted to give her one last thing. He took a pen from his pocket and grabbed a piece of paper, starting to draw something. A few moments later, he handed her the paper, which featured a sketch of Lindsay along with his name and phone number. Tatsuya Ichihashi was a 28-year-old man from the city of Ichikawa, also located in Chiba Prefecture. He was born in Gifu Prefecture on January 5, 1979, and spent his childhood there before moving to Chiba. He came from a successful family. His father was a doctor at a local hospital, and his mother was a professional dentist. In his youth, Tatsuya dreamed of following in his father's footsteps and becoming a doctor, but after failing the exams and being prevented from continuing his studies, he ended up graduating in horticulture from Chiba University in 2005. Although he graduated relatively well, Tatsuya made no effort to find a job. Instead, he lived off an allowance of 100,000 yen, about $920, a month provided by his parents. And it was then that we began to learn about the dark side of Tatsuya Ichihashi. Although he had no prior convictions, he was the subject of a theft and assault charge. He allegedly attacked a woman in the street during a robbery, but the case was settled out of court, with his father paying about 1 million yen, $10,000, to the woman. Tatsuya was also described as a loner, obsessed with fitness, regularly attending the local gym and biking over 25 kilometers every day. Additionally, he was known to be reclusive and rebellious, with no intention of finding a job. With only $900 a month, could he really sustain himself with weekly sessions of $35 an hour? Back at Lindsay's apartment, after handing over the sketch with his name and number, Tatsuya thanked her for her time and the glass of water, wishing her well until the meeting set for a few days later. Fast forward a few days, we arrive at Saturday, March 24th, 2007. Lindsay had contacted Tatsuya a few days earlier, and they set up their first English lesson at a local cafe. Security cameras captured the two talking while they were in line to grab a drink. Lindsay appeared relatively comfortable, but took steps back whenever Tatsuya got too close. They talked for a little over an hour, and the progress was good. In the end, Tatsuya awkwardly pointed out that he had forgotten the money. "No problem," he said. "I live just 800 meters from here. Why don't you come pick up the money, and then you can go on your way?" Lindsay agreed, and the two took a taxi. As she hadn't brought her bike that day and had to work later, she asked the taxi driver to wait for her while she got the payment. He agreed, and Lindsay followed Tatsuya to his apartment. Several minutes later, Lindsay still hadn't returned. The driver thought this was strange, but figured she might have changed her plans. Without further ado, he left, completely forgetting about the incident. Lindsay, however, did not show up for work that afternoon, and worse yet, she did not return to her apartment. Her roommates, who had already noticed her absence at work, began to worry. They called the police that night to report her missing. However, Saturday turned into Sunday, and Sunday turned into Monday. Lindsay's family and friends in the UK were starting to worry about her silence. It was only on Monday, when she missed work for the second time, that the school contacted Lindsay's parents to inform them that she had been absent for 2 consecutive days, and shortly afterward, they contacted the police. It was only then that the police began to take Lindsay's disappearance more seriously. Search efforts began at Lindsay's home, and her roommates were the first to be interviewed. Luckily, they already had a suspect in mind. They knew that Lindsay had met with a man at a cafe shortly before she went missing and had left a sketch in the apartment. This was the first clue the police had. Around 5:40 p.m., 2 officers were sent to Tatsuya's home, but no one answered the door. However, his neighbors were home and kindly allowed the officers to look through the balcony into Tatsuya's living room. There were no lights on in the property, but it appeared that someone was moving around inside. Strangely, his portable bathtub had been moved from the bathroom to the balcony. With an intuition, the 2 officers called for backup. They feared that Lindsay might be held hostage inside the house. In less than an hour, 7 more officers arrived. 3 hours and 9 officers later, they were preparing to storm Tatsuya's home. It was at this moment, in a surprise, that Tatsuya opened the front door carrying a backpack. In a moment of panic, he ran past the officers, who could only grab his backpack. Tatsuya escaped, and with the narrow, confusing hallways of the building and the lack of radios, the officers lost sight of him. Thus, in the middle of Tokyo, Tatsuya vanished into the night, as if he had literally evaporated into thin air. And as he fled, the police investigating his property found a horrific scene. There lay the naked body of Lindsay Hawker, buried in Tatsuya's portable bathtub, which he had moved to the balcony. The bathtub was filled with a mixture of sand and dirt, almost completely covering Lindsay, with only her right hand emerging from the surface. She was bound and gagged with plastic strips and scarves, and her body showed signs of bruising. In her final moments, she had been subjected to a prolonged attack. Her belongings were scattered around the room, and the bathtub, filled with sand and dirt, also contained a decomposition agent to accelerate the process of the body's deterioration. Flower seeds had been placed on top of the bathtub to disguise it as a flower bed. The seeds would eventually grow, nourished by Lindsay's body. To make the discovery even more disturbing, it was also noted that Tatsuya had shaved all of Lindsay's hair. Wigs were found in Tatsuya's apartment, raising the possibility that he planned to escape in disguise. The investigation into Lindsay Hawker's case revealed some additional findings. The police found several wigs in Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment, raising suspicion that he might be a crossdresser. This quickly became public knowledge, generating rumors that perhaps Tatsuya had killed Lindsay with the intention of using her hair as a wig. The next morning, Tatsuya became officially wanted across Japan. The police distributed wanted posters throughout the city, with his face plastered across various news sites, as well as interviewing people who might have information and conducting operations in places where he could be hiding. But despite the efforts, Tatsuya seemed to have vanished like a ghost. For weeks, there were almost no sightings, and all leads led to dead ends. Desperate to capture him, the police even released edited images of Tatsuya wearing wigs in case he was in disguise. However, Tatsuya was skilled at staying off the radar. His disappearance stretched from weeks to months, and eventually years. This caused great frustration for Lindsay's family, who, in addition to the pain of losing their daughter, felt that her murderer had escaped unpunished. They also criticized the Japanese police for failures in the investigation. The situation irritated Lindsay's parents so much that they traveled to Japan to raise awareness about the case. Lindsay's father, Bill, even met with members of the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, asking for help in finding Tatsuya. Over time, the investigation and the Japanese police began to come under fire from both British and Japanese media, and pressure was mounting to find the fugitive. Meanwhile, Tatsuya traveled across various regions of Japan, from Aomori in the north to Okinawa in the south. He even lived on remote islands and in concrete bunkers to avoid capture. In 2008 and 2009, Tatsuya settled in Osaka, living in internet cafes and working construction jobs to sustain himself. He used the money to undergo plastic surgeries that helped him change his appearance and make it more difficult to identify him. Additionally, Tatsuya brutally modified his face, removing moles and mutilating parts of his features. In 2009, the police, desperate, increased the reward for information about Tatsuya from 1 million to 10 million yen. They announced that he had likely altered his appearance with plastic surgery, asking people to be on the lookout for any similarities. This strategy finally paid off in October 2009 when a plastic surgeon in Nagoya recognized Tatsuya as his patient. The doctor had taken before and after photos of Tatsuya's surgery, which were then shared with the police and the public, compromising his disguise. This left Tatsuya in a panic, and one of his co-workers recognized him, warning him about the situation. Tatsuya decided to flee again, planning to take refuge in Okinawa. On November 10, 2009, he attempted to discreetly leave Osaka via the port, but was recognized by a worker at the site. Security was alerted, and Tatsuya was ultimately approached by police. With no way out, he admitted his identity, saying, "Yes, I am Tatsuya Ichihashi." He was then arrested and initially charged with abandonment of a body, followed by charges of rape and murder. Tatsuya's trial began on July 4, 2011. He confessed to luring Lindsay to his apartment, where he attacked and strangled her for fear that the neighbors would hear her screams. On July 21, 2011, Tatsuya Ichihashi was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Lindsay Hawker. Although Lindsay's family had requested the death penalty, the court determined that, due to the absence of prior convictions, there was a possibility of rehabilitation. During the proceedings, Tatsuya wrote an autobiography titled Until I Was Arrested, in which he recounted his 2.5-year escape. He offered the profits from the book to Lindsay's family, who declined, stating that nothing could bring their daughter back. The sentence brought some relief to the family, but not without them having to relive the painful details of the case. Lindsay, who loved Japan and was cherished by her family and friends, had her life cut short by a man who took advantage of her kindness. Thank you for watching another video today, brought to you by The Investigator. And a special thank you to everyone who has supported my videos and continues to come back for more cases. Your presence is essential, and I value every comment and like. The channel is growing rapidly, and it's amazing to see all of you following this journey with me. If you found this case interesting, don't forget to like the video. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel, because, well, if you don't subscribe, who knows, you might end up being the next target of my investigations. Just kidding, of course. Or am I?